welcome to our webinar today. This is on the importance of data reliability, and we've seen that go up and more and more important for teams across the board, but specifically for teams that are doing regulatory reporting. We have found that reliable data is extremely crucial, and so we are excited to share a little bit about our story and how we think you can solve this following our framework. So to shed some light on this, we have invited our fearless co-founder and CEO, Jonathan Agee. He has been solving data reliability issues across dozens and dozens of clients over the last 15 years. And he is going to take us through the whole process. So everybody welcome Jonathan and give him a round of applause, and we will dive right in. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. Before we actually get into the content, I want to make sure that you all out there are hearing us. So if you can go ahead and use the chat and do kind of a tech check, drop in the chat just where you are joining us from. So city, state, all of that. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for doing that. All right. Okay. We've got Dallas, we've got Boston, North Carolina, another Dallas, Minnesota, Frisco, Texas. Excellent. We've got more coming in. Atlanta, Georgia. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Emil. Thank you, Raul. Pennsylvania. Very good. We've got the country pretty covered here. Iowa. Very good. Sunshine. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us again. All right. Excellent. Well, sounds like we've got some good connectivity. You can hear. I am so excited for our conversation today. And as Matt said, the impact of regulation and compliance on data teams is hard to underestimate and hard to understate. And so this is really an important topic. As Matt said, I've been doing data and analytics consulting and solutioning for over 15 years. And I just wanted to share a little anecdote about one of my first clients. I was a consultant with Republic Services, and we built their environmental compliance system where we managed all their permits and violations and all of that sort of stuff that was required for generating their state compliance reports in order to continue to operate in every single state. So the work that we were doing managing that data was absolutely critical to their continued business operations. And over the years, I've worked with banks, insurance companies, hospitals, airlines, etc., each of them facing similar challenges when it comes to regulation and reporting and the data processes that they had to support. Over the years, I've found that two keys that the keys to success in data solutions have been really kind of two key threads that I want to talk about. And you're going to see how these threads underlie the frameworks that we're going to talk about. So one is standardization of all your processes, and the other is automation. And I think both of those are really at the center of how we can build reliability for our data. So today we're going to be sharing with you a couple of frameworks and how you can implement them. And then at the end, if it's okay, we want to kind of share something more about how you can take data reliability to the next level. So I'm going to teach you everything that we've got here, everything that I know and have learned over the last years about data reliability and how that can be applied and thought about within a regulatory process. So if you're down, let's put it in the chat, data reliability with some exclamation marks. Let's hear it from everybody. And we are excited to get started. So with that, let's see, everyone excited? All right, data reliability. All right, we've got some folks that are excited. All right, it's coming in. All right, thank you for doing that. All right, so what happens when data reliability fails? And so here we've got a story about Equifax, front page news on CNN. And this is the kind of stuff that happens. You don't want to be landing on front page news on CNN. So what happened? In 2017, Equifax compromised PII for over 150 million people, probably some of you who are on the call. And the impact of that to Equifax was that they had to pay over $700 million to state and local and federal regulators to settle out of this process. So you don't want to be the one who's dealing with that and who had that data reliability issue, that breakdown in process. So let's try and stay out of that. And in 2022, an Equifax coding issue, which was in place for several weeks, I understand, led to millions of incorrect credit scores being sent out to lenders. Some folks had more than a 25% shift in their credit score. And this ended up impacting Equifax with over a 5% drop in their market cap, which was a $1.5 billion impact to the valuation of the business. So these things are really costly when they happen. And so it's really critical as a business to stay out of trouble. And the costs can go even farther than this. They can go all the way to just getting shut down if a bank, for example, doesn't meet criteria from the feds. So it's really critical. So we're going to jump into the next portion, and we're going to share our frameworks that I've developed over the years and how we think about data reliability. So to do that, this is going to be an interactive process. So hopefully, can you all see my screen? Tell me if you can see my screen. Let's see. Don't think it's coming up yet. Stop share. I'm going to do a new share. Uh-oh, we're having technical difficulties, of course. There we go. Think you can all see that. All right, give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see Data Reliability Engine. So there we go. Yep. All right. I love the interactivity here. This is awesome. Fantastic. Thank you. So what we've got here with the Data Reliability Engine, the first thing we're going to dig into and understand is what are the causes, the primary causes of data issues and data defects, which are what we're trying to eliminate. And so first off, we've got unreliable source data. And I think you've all probably experienced this, where you cannot rely on a lot of those inputs when you're building a data and analytics process. Maybe you're responsible for some ETL or a report, and you really can't depend on what you're using for it. And it's really frustrating because of that. One of the other primary causes is coding errors. So what I mean by that is basically a bug, right? We're humans, we make mistakes. We don't always nail the code exactly the way it should. And sometimes, those have an interplay where, unreliable source data triggers a problem with your code that you didn't plan for or expect. And that leads us into the third primary cause of data defects, and that would be incomplete or opaque requirements. And so when you've got incomplete requirements, that might be because you just don't understand the complexities that you have going on. You might not know enough about the data. You might, the business might be changing and in flux, and so you have to build something that you don't necessarily have full information about. And so as we think about how can we address these particular challenges and build data reliability, where we want to start here really is at the bottom. We're gonna think about how do we address this incomplete and opaque requirements first. And what we like to think about here is that the key in this is documentation and profiling. And so the profiling is going to allow you to understand your data that you're working with. Where is it coming from? How is it behaving? What sort of things can we expect from it? So we're going to be able to have a better idea and develop better requirements. And then the documentation is going to allow today and future us or other people on our team who are now working with this data to understand it better and use it more effectively. As we work our way back around the coding errors, how do we handle that? And this is something that is really critical. And so this is where we've got to do testing. And testing for data is really challenging. We're going to get into some more about what do we mean by that? How can you accomplish that? But honestly, I believe that our industry, the data and analytics industry, has really raised up almost a generation of data engineers who testing is not as much a part of their parlance of how they think about projects as it should be. Now, in the regulated industries, testing sometimes is just an absolute requirement, but it's a pretty manual usually. So we're going to talk more about that. So then as we think about unreliable source data and understanding how can we get more reliability when we can't trust that source data, really it comes down to being able to monitor. So we've got monitoring over there. So I'm curious if you can post in the chat for, in your experience, which of these three issues on the inside of this triangle have been the biggest issues in your world, in your experience? Is it unreliable source data? Is it bugs and coding errors? Or is it incomplete and opaque requirements? I'm really curious from the folks we've got on the call, if you can interact with that, which one's most significant for you? All right, so we've got some unreliable source data. Yes, I think that's a huge one. That's why I started with it, Sherry. I agree. I've definitely experienced that. All of them? Yes, John, agreed. Okay, very good. I see some commonality, unreliable source data. Very good. And so I want to kind of demystify these things though. What do we mean by monitoring? What do we mean by testing? And what do we mean by documentation and profiling? Because I think that really helps us then move forward effectively with how do we address them. So when we think about monitoring, really want to talk about, what kinds of things can we monitor, right? So it all starts with, I think, making sure that we have a good understanding of the structure of data. So that might be the file structure. It might be a database that we're working with. All of those, what are the columns? What are their data types? When those things change out from under us, they can really wreak havoc in our processes, right? I'm sure you've all experienced that. Secondly, certainly we want to monitor the contents of that. So that would be values. What are the typical values in a given column? What do they look like? How are they changing over time? Those sorts of things. And then, certainly we can get into some other things like maybe how fresh is the data? That's very relevant often for understanding, is this being used? Is it not? When was it last refreshed, et cetera? And then I think something that not a lot of folks do, but is really powerful, is monitoring your code. And one of our clients, Texas Mutual Insurance, they've really gone a long ways with this, and we've learned from them. Honestly, they've monitored every single aspect of their code to implement standards and ensure that that when you go to deploy, you're not deploying anything that's out of expected standards. And my video stopped, and I turned that back on. All right, so as we move over from kind of what does monitoring look like, hopefully that demystifies that a little bit, and we get into the testing side of things. Really want to talk a little bit about what is the purpose of testing here. And so The purpose of testing really comes down to a few different things. One is, you've probably heard the phrase a unit test. And so a unit test is where we're checking a particular piece of code to ensure that it's working as expected, as designed, and functioning properly. So those are super critical as we build new code and new processes. What's equally important is as we build new code and new processes, those could have an effect on things that have already been built and already deployed. And so that's where regression testing comes in. And so as you can imagine, many unit tests probably eventually become regression tests when they've now been proved to be working. And then in the future, we want to make sure they're still working. Another type of test that I would want to point out would be something like a checkpoint. And so this would be where your code maybe is running a process and you want to ensure either before you start or after it's run that the data is all either ready or has fully been processed as expected. So that's a really critical thing. So these tests can be of all different types. They might be checking source to target mappings. They might be checking, that did all the data load, did every file load, is the file there, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of different options there. Now, what do we mean by documentation and profiling? So I want to start with documentation. This really comes down to cataloging the technical and the business metadata. So the technical metadata would be, the structure, all of those sorts of things, understanding data types, et cetera. The business metadata is where we really start to layer in a lot of value here. And that's going to tell us why we're doing things, who's responsible for it, what definitions are, what connects to what. And so, for example, one of our clients, ANBTX, they really leverage the lineage in their catalog to be able to communicate where did data come from, where is it going. That's an example of something that would be really critical to document and to share. And when it comes to profiling, this can be a lot of different things depending on your needs and use cases. And so this could be, aggregates, things like, minimums, maximums, distinct counts, et cetera, number of nulls, number of blanks, those sorts of things. Certainly we can do sampling, samples, distributions, et cetera. But I do want to point out profiling is often only used at kind of a discovery type of phase. And we believe that really it's most important and most valuable when you can use it over time. If I can erase and write correctly, over time. So that allows us to really understand how the data are changing over time. So really important to do that. So if you can drop in the chat, which of these areas, monitoring, testing, documentation, and profiling, do you feel is the area where you need to focus on the most for your data reliability? All right, I'm really curious to see what you all have. Keeping you on your toes here. Monitoring, okay, yes. Testing, okay, so getting more, man, we've got the whole gamut covered here. Thank you, Sherry, John. All right, any others? Curious if one stands out over the others. All right, testing. Yes, Emil. Thank you for that. All right, so how do we put this into practice? Let's kind of break this down. So what we see in real life practice, unfortunately, is that for most people, how they approach documentation, profiling, testing, and monitoring, it ends up being very siloed. And that's unfortunate because there's just not a lot of information that's available or shared. Maybe you're doing one or two of these things in a silo, but it's not a cohesive process. And this one is a kicker. Most of these processes today are very manual. And I think if your processes for testing, profiling, documentation are manual, put manual in the chat. I think that'll be most of you, unfortunately, based on talking to our clients. So the other factor of this is that most of this information that we're creating and gathering here ends up getting lost. And that's just because there's not a standard way to store it over time. And this puts us, in honestly a risky position when it comes to our compliance processes and our regulations. So what we want to have instead of siloed, manual, lost, and risky processes is we want to build centralized approaches. Could be standardized, centralized, those sorts of things. We want them to, instead of being manual, we want them to be as automated as possible. And instead of getting lost when it comes to compliance and regulation, it's really critical that all of these processes be 100% auditable. And at the end of the day, in order to demonstrate their value and to be really useful to the organization and make sure it's in front of the right people, they need to be governed. So what does that mean? What does that look like? So we believe that in order to deliver this type of solution and build a reliability framework, you've got to have a centralized catalog for your data. That's where you're going to be able to document and profile the information. And then everything, in order to be automated, really needs to start and end kind of with metadata. You'll see how that plays out as we go forward. And then in that metadata, as we talked about cataloging and the criticality of business metadata, we really want to document our expectations. So that's going to allow us to have really auditable processes where we can track those expectations and go back to them and refer to them. And in order to not be at risk, to have a well-governed process, we have to have good security controls in place. Not spelling correctly. Security, there we go. So now when it comes to testing and monitoring, what does this look like in order to have this centralized? Well, we have to have a centralized repository for our test cases. Often test cases today, when we talk to folks, they're all over the place. They're manual, they're documented maybe in some Word documents or some Excel sheets, and there's no one central place. It's very easy for those things to be tribal knowledge that end up getting lost. So the tests and the monitoring processes, they've got to be automated in their execution and in their evaluation. Otherwise, those regression tests, you just never get to them because you don't have the time and the team in order to deliver those on time for the kinds of data projects that folks are doing. To be auditable, you've got to have really great reporting and alerting about those tests and monitor processes that you have running. And finally, in order to have everything be well governed, it's really critical that everything that you're doing in terms of testing and monitoring be versioned. So if this framework gives you pretty much a guide for all of the key factors that you need to be thinking about in terms of your data reliability and how you can build a process for documenting and profiling your data and then testing and monitoring it over time. And so what I want to go into next is how does this apply and how do we think about this in relation to kind of regulatory imperatives that are out there. So when you think about regulatory processes, just to bring those kind of to the forefront here, we're gonna touch on a few key industries. Pretty much every industry has some type of regulatory compliance that's required. especially as you get into public companies and things like that. There's just higher and higher standards that are set. But when it comes to some key industries, we've got like banking. And for banks, of course, a couple of example, key regulations. You're going to have your call report. You've got CECL, some key reporting processes, key monitoring processes that the feds have put in place to track the health and stability of banks. Very important in our current climate. When it comes to another highly regulated industry, insurance, you've got consumer protection. And insurance, of course, is managed and regulated a bit more at the state level than at the federal level. And so you have a lot of state filing reports that you have to do. And then another one, of course, would be healthcare. And so in healthcare, we've got a lot of, sensitive data, not that these others don't, but there's high sensitivity with HIPAA and things like that. But a lot of the filing and compliance processes are tied to federal programs like Medicare and Medicaid. So that's just to kind of, remind us all, where are we at? What are some of the kinds of processes that we're talking about that are driving these sorts of regulatory imperatives? And so as we think about what are the types of burdens that this puts on organizations, right? You've got, of course, your monthly and quarterly processes. So those might be reporting requirements that you have to follow. They're key processes. You're going to have to review that data. You need it to be ready to go and trusted and verified every time that report comes due. Otherwise, you run afoul with that. Of course, as you do that, you need to have full audit trails for all of that. It's absolutely critical. And then you're going to end up with mandated changes to those reports that'll come out, and you'll have to comply with the timeframes that are established for those. Of course, you have other things that are ongoing that are going to be really critical here. Things like records management, and then, of course, you've got for different industries, for different scenarios, you have your ISO certification standards of compliance. So lots going on here that you have to really keep a foot of. And when you don't have a reliability framework for your data, you're going to be faced with some key problems. And so first and foremost, you're going to end up with a lot of manual processes. And as you know, manual processes are expensive, take a lot of time, and put you at risk of not being able to stay compliant. Of course, as we've saw at the opening, when we talked about what can go wrong with this, you've got folks like Experian who have suffered significant loss of credibility when they have a problem and they find data defects that their reliability framework did not catch. And then, of course, you could lose revenue. Lost revenue could be significant. That could be from maybe not being able to operate for a certain amount of time, or even just from that loss of credibility with your customers. And then, as you get into things like lawsuits and fines, those are really significant for organizations. And ultimately, you could have a loss of your operating license. So those are just some of the key regulatory imperatives that get into, come into play, and some of the consequences if you don't have a strong reliability framework. As we've said, this is true for just about every industry, there's some of those in place, but you know, we feel like banking, insurance, healthcare really kind of rise to the top of where we see a lot of regulation in the data teams. All right, I am going to switch back to my slides. All right. Hopefully you all can see that. So what's next? We've got our framework. We've shared this framework for how do we think about data reliability and testing, monitoring, documenting, profiling those key elements. But where do you start? What's going on in your world, and how do you start to think about that? So first off, as you think about your current processes, you've already shared, right? Maybe you need to focus more on monitoring, maybe you need to focus more on testing, maybe it's on profiling. And as you think about your current processes where you have gaps, then you might come in and think about, okay, what about my existing tools that I've got? Where can they plug and play? And so what we see in most organizations that we speak to is that existing tools, you may be doing a couple of these things. You may have the capability to, you know, run some profiling. You may have a good place and a process for documenting. Maybe you have a catalog for some of that technical and business metadata that makes it shareable and you know, centralized. But what we find is that the really critical barrier to being able to build a strong reliability framework for your data is not having all of these capabilities in one place, in one platform. And so if it's okay with you, I'd love to share with you how we believe you can really up your game and move forward much more quickly. So if you're excited about that, put reliability in the chat, and we're going to go forward and talk a little bit more about how you can see a really great increase in your data reliability. All right, thanks, John. Reliability. Okay, we've got a few people coming in here. All right, well, this is exactly why we created Validatar. Validatar is the QA platform for data, and I'm really excited to share a little bit more about that, about Validatar. And if you stay to the end, there's going to be some really great opportunities for you to get some great value. So don't, you know, hold on for that. We'll be sharing some really key information that you won't want to miss right at the end. So what is Validatar? What is this QA platform? And how can it be the key central piece to your data reliability processes? So first and foremost, Validatar is going to be a place where you can do all of those elements of that framework that we talked about. We can do all the documenting and profiling, and we can run all your testing and monitoring processes for all of your data, all in one tool. And so with that, we can connect to all different kinds of data, whether that's files, whether that's databases or reports. And when you think about your processes, how many of you have thought, hey, if we only had a check for that when something goes wrong, a report breaks, it's not working, let's implement a check for that. And I think so many of us, when we've said that at times, we've not had a good place to put that. We've not had a good place to do that check. And sometimes that's really complicated. Maybe you need to compare some data from a database, a query that you run, to a report that's out there on your Tableau server or your Power BI. And that's a challenging thing to do and would require a lot of manual effort to build a process if you don't have one. And so Validatar serves as the tool where you can go in and build that and create that test, create that monitoring process very quickly and easily. So it's a centralized platform that provides you a data catalog, provides you management for all of your test cases. It centralizes all of your metadata, runs and executes those tests, sends you reports and alerts when things fail, when you need to come in and check on stuff. There's really strong security permissions all set up in the platform, and everything that you do within the platform is versioned. And you know, that's where really kind of the rubber meets the road, is being able to do all of these things in one platform. So what are the benefits of leveraging Validator for your regulatory compliance? So what we see as one of the top benefits is lowering the cost of regulatory reporting. So one of our clients, DFW Hospital Council, relies on Validator to automate critical tests every single month that eliminate the need for manual validation of data prior to submitting reports to stakeholders and regulators. So that's a really a critical factor for them. They don't have enough staff to be doing manual testing every single month. And so they're able to have much more confidence in those regulatory reporting processes because of Validator. Another key benefit is shortening timelines and minimizing defects on your data projects. And so every regulatory compliance reporting change results in some kind of data project, not to mention all the other data projects that you're doing just to run your business and win in this competitive environment. And so Texas Mutual Insurance used Validator to automate monitoring of their data and coding standards, as well as comprehensive unit and regression testing. And they can boast an unheard of achievement of going over 24 months without their business users finding a data anomaly or defect. And that's just, I've never heard of that before. They've blown our mind in terms of seeing how they've implemented Validator. So we're so excited to share that with you. And our hope is that you too could find that sort of reliability in your data. And then, of course, risk is a critical factor in regulatory compliance. And so our goal, one of the benefits of using Validator would be to reduce that compliance risk. And the Georgia Department of Public Health uses Validator to monitor permissions and grants in their data vault that they're building to reduce concerns about breaches and streamlining security audits. So a huge benefit to them, and increases their confidence in their whole data environment immensely. All right, so we could tell you many more success stories about reliability from various different ones of our customers that we would be happy to share with you if we had the opportunity to meet with you and talk to you more about Validator. And so that leads us into our bonus offer for today. So like I said, I promised that we would bring you value. If this framework for data reliability and our data reliability engine that we talked about earlier in the call is valuable, I'd love you to drop the word value in the chat. And if you'd like to hear more about this, and if you feel like you need to have this sort of reliability in your data environment, then we invite you to schedule a demo of Validator for you and your team. And we've got the link right here, but the link is going to also get dropped in the chat. One of our team members will be doing that. And so we've got a bonus offer, especially for you today. So if you go ahead and schedule that demo right now, as a thank you, we're going to send you the Data Reliability Toolkit, which has all of these frameworks. It'll have all the information that we've shared today on this webinar, which is value. Thank you. I see a bunch of folks there. We'll also send you a very valuable document. This is a template for your test plans for data. And this gives you example tests that you should be implementing. It explains why those would be critical. It's broken down by different stages in your data processes, whether that's when you're loading data into a new data environment, whether it's a report that needs to be tested. So this is a test plan, and you could spend hours and hours building this out, but we've done that for you and can share that with you. So as a thank you, we'll go ahead and send those to you. And if you're not a Validator customer and you schedule a demo with us today, then when you purchase Validator and subscribe for a 12-month subscription, then you can earn 1 extra month for free. And that could be a $2,000 plus value depending on what your particular subscription looks like. So you'll get 13 months for the price of 12. So a great value for you today. And if you, as an add-on to that, we're really passionate about getting folks up to speed using the platform and getting the most value from it. So we're also going to include the Validator Basics training for you. If you do that, go ahead and schedule that demo today. So that's a total value of over $7,000 just for being on this webinar. So we're really glad that you were here. So if you click on that link that Matt dropped in the chat, thank you, Matt, and fill that out, what you're going to see is you're going to see a page on our website. All you have to do is click the schedule the demo right there. So just click that button and that'll drop you over to where you can pick a time for your demo over the next few weeks. And this will immediately go ahead and get it scheduled so you can have that on your calendar. And we will, I can't wait to see who we get to meet with, who's excited about beginning their data reliability journey. So with that, I want to take it over to question and answer. You've got the link on your screen there, and we're going to open it up for any questions you may have. And I think there may be some coming in. So if you can do your questions instead of in the chat, you could do them in the chat, but if you can do them in the Q&A panel, that would be great. That way we make sure I can get them logged and don't lose them as people start answering and asking things in the chat. So anyone got questions that about the framework, about data reliability, about regulatory compliance and how data reliability plays into that, about Validator, and what this process looks like? All right. Well, one question that we commonly get asked is, how do you deploy Validator? Where does it live and how do users connect to it? So Validator, that's part of what you'll see more in the demo. But Validator is a web application that is deployed in your environment, either as our server edition or as a software as a service in our cloud edition. So you can deploy it either way and get going that way. All right, so we got a couple questions here. One is, how do I get started with data reliability and testing automation and things like that faster? And so what we've got, one of the things that was on you may have seen it on the slide about the Validator platform, is we have a marketplace. And that marketplace is full of free and some paid, but mostly free starter packages that give you a kickstart for how you can build up, whether you're jumping into a migration project or whether you're looking at testing reports or anything like that. We've got a starter package for you that will help you get into this idea of automated testing and monitoring very quickly and efficiently. All right, we've got another question coming in here. So thinking about what's the financial impact of implementing Validator? So we've seen folks be able to dramatically accelerate their projects. We've seen people do they do a migration project as much as 50% faster. When you think about that, it depends on the size and scale of the project, but that can be a really significant savings to a project, because often the barrier to going live with a new solution is that QA process. And when QA comes in late to the project and the users start finding bug after bug after bug because the users are doing the testing, then inevitably that project runs long, takes more time, more resources, more expense. So really can have a significant impact on the overall total cost of doing a data and analytics project. All right, so we've got a question about 24 months without defects being reported. So yeah, it's a good story, and it's really true. And so what that looked like was, from the very beginning of the project, Texas Mutual implemented really rigorous testing processes. They looked at everything from the code to unit testing, to regression testing, every piece of it that they were monitoring and testing. And so their first deployment to production deployed over 6,000 objects in their migrated data warehouse in Snowflake. And then from that point forward, they detected all kinds of issues before they ever got to production or before they ever got to users, and were able to fix that and manage that. So you can imagine the value to the business of that low of a defect rate. So during a demo, we will cover the architecture of the platform. We will cover understanding your needs and your processes of your current processes around data reliability, how you handle those. What does testing look like? What does monitoring look like? Where do you have the most needs in your organization? And then we will share with you how Validator can address those. And so that might be some very targeted looks at specific capabilities of Validator, whether that's testing, whether that's monitoring, catalog, documentation, those sorts of things. And you should really invite, especially anyone who's involved in data quality, QA, but also when you think about it, the architecture and the business requirements of those processes. So anyone on the data team really can get excited and see the value when they come in and see how Validator would interact with their processes in the data world. So I think that's most of our questions. Do we have any other questions coming in? Thank you so much to everyone who's sharing questions. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. I can't wait. Like I said before, I cannot wait to see who we're going to get to meet with personally to look at your data processes and help you improve data reliability.